Happy Sunday, happy last day of Martin Webb's show. As usual, we're here to talk about the artist, the work a little bit, and you guys can ask questions as we discuss the work. And I don't know, if you have any insights into Martin as a person, or this particular body of work, or what he does on the outside of this particular body of work, because Martin does a lot of different things. He not only shows in galleries, he does a lot of large murals and public art projects, sculptural installations. Pretty impressive. He's a very hard-working man. He's one of the hardest working artists I know, really. I mean, he produces a lot of work, and he's very professional, and we love working with him. So I'll let Martin talk about himself a little bit, talk about this body of work, and if you guys have questions throughout, just shout out, and then we can go from there. So, Mr. Martin Webb.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all coming, and thanks to Lena and Matt for hosting my work again.
Of course.
Always a pleasure. Yeah, it's great. It's always great to have the support and a venue to be doing stuff for. So this show, this show was originally going to be a two-person show, but the other artist, Barbara Holmes, had to drop out fairly sort of late in the day, which was a real shame actually, because it would have been really nice to do work playing off each other. But it's worked out well like this. And some of the things that she and I had talked about kind of helped get where I went, get me rolling in that direction. So that definitely had an effect on it. But this work is all really kind of carrying on from stuff I did last year. As Matt said, I've done quite a few public art projects, and the last year or so, I've been doing quite a lot of those. And there've been various different things, different materials, and different scales. And those projects can be really time consuming. So I haven't really had much sort of flow of studio work for about 18 months. It's always been very bitty and in fragments. So I was sort of looking at what I'd been doing and what I wanted to do with the time I'd set aside for this show as being sort of the first time I had a really significant chunk of studio time for a while. And it was one of those things where I wanted to do something that was new but kind of picked up from some of the sort of strong points of what I'd done before, maybe. So a lot of the work I'd done earlier last year was very figurative, and I don't know, I just kind of run into a bit of a dead end with the figures, and I wanted to have a bit of a break from doing work with figures. Quite a few had animals in as well, and they'd had these little motifs of buildings I've used for a long time now, for probably the last 10 years, though. The little houses have featured a lot. In fact, ever since moving from England to the United States, I've actually always had these little houses, which is probably some significance about home and that sort of thing in there. I had this sort of the houses, I had these figures. I've done a lot of things with plants and foliage as well. A lot of the prints that you'll see from in that print bin there from last year have lots of foliage in them. And I was planning on this show, I wanted to do something where it was going to be all these houses and lots of trees and foliage and no figures. But the trees and foliage didn't make it in there either. I'd actually gone around taking photographs at night because I just sort of noticed that you're walking around at night, you're looking at the houses and the trees and so on in a different, very stark lighting. Just gave them a different sort of visual, and I kind of liked some of the sort of atmospheric visuals that I was getting from that, and they actually reminded me of some of the visuals that I sort of accidentally got with those prints, because that was a sort of an experimental round of printmaking, because I'm not a printmaker. It was really just kind of like me blindly going in and experimenting, and a lot of them ended up very dark and ending up looking like they were sort of almost like scenes at night. So I thought, well, I might as well go with this, and I'll go out on the street at night and take some photographs. So I had this idea I was going to do lots of foliage, trees and houses and at night, and that was kind of my starting point. And
that piece you have in the art shop with the trees and the figures, that you mentioned didn't fit in with this show, but it was a really nice piece. Was that kind of a preface to what you're
right,
about?
yeah. I did a group show at the end of last year, and I did a lot of small paintings for that. Just playing around with some of these ideas and playing around with all these images that I'd got from the night photos just to see what would happen. And the most successful ones out of that were ones that didn't have any figures in and were just making use of these really sort of simple, almost geometric kind of patterns and houses and fences. A lot of it was just around here in Berkeley. So yeah, those paintings, it was kind of like this series of paintings that looked like it was done by about 3 different artists at first, but I sort of pulled out the bits I identified most with out of it. So that was sort of the starting point for all of it. And I thought, well, I'll keep going small because the last show I did here was big. They were all 6 foot by 4 foot paintings. And so I thought it'd be kind of interesting to contrast. And I was just on a roll of doing these smaller paintings. And it's a lot lower risk doing small paintings. You can kind of experiment and you don't have to worry. I mean, obviously you're less invested in doing a small piece of work if it doesn't work out. It's not such a big deal, but also it's kind of less complicated with composition and things like that. It's maybe there's less pictorial stuff to try and juggle on small paintings, so I can sort of resolve them more easily and quickly. So I just wanted to sort of process a lot of variations of the same limited vocabulary as quickly as possible. So that was my plan. And actually all these are from, everything here was done in 5 weeks. So yeah, it was a matter of processing a lot in a small period of time.
Part of one large painting, in a sense, because
yeah.
you've kept to a very similar color palette and theme. They stand alone nicely by themselves, but maybe that's part of your, mural installation background as well.
Yeah.
It's very cohesive.
Yeah, and it comes from working on them all together as well. I work on a lot at any one time. I think there was always at least 8 pieces on the wall at any time in some state of progress, which is just, I don't know, I even with the big pieces I always like to have a few going, because otherwise you get sort of dead time while you're stuck. But if you've got lots going, you can move on to something else. And yeah,
you definitely migrated with this body of work at least to a very minimalist sensibility. Is that somewhere you're headed, you think? I mean, is work in 5 years from now going to be a gray canvas? Or are you headed with this?
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's an interesting point, yeah, because I did want to just think of these as abstract paintings. I mean, the images in them and the sort of symbolism of those images, it definitely means something. I mean, but one of the reasons I chose to do houses is because, and I think why I've always been drawn to doing these houses is because they're kind of like just a common currency. It's like everybody relates to them in different ways. But it's such a universal thing that it's almost not a thing. It's not a complicated subject to be. It's not like it's a sort of anything new that gets in the way of just seeing it as a painting. It's like any of these, hopefully you can just kind of treat as an abstract painting and or ignore that it's a house. Just as easily as seeing a house and then reading lots of things that you might read into the fact that it's a house. So yeah, it was an emphasis on the abstract, definitely, and that was part of the reason for getting rid of the figures too, because as soon as you start putting figures in, you start getting a narrative, and I wanted to do something that doesn't really have a narrative, it's just an image that has no backstory and no concrete implication. It's just something you can take at face value and weigh up in its abstract terms, hopefully. So, but I don't think I'm going to go to grey canvases. I think, actually, the colours are a bit brighter than they have been before. So, I don't know. Maybe that's a product of working small. I crammed a lot of colour into a small space. So, and some of them as well, they had this very sort of mellow, rich kind of colour palette, which I liked. But then I mixed it with some of them, like, and surprised myself. Like, there's one over there which has this really sort of acid lime green in it with the red flag. Yeah. And I was thinking that just doesn't look like something I would do at all. Which is good. So I don't know, maybe I'll start going for really bright colours, who knows. And the other thing that happened was I'd collected this sort of nighttime imagery from wandering around just locally and was working from these photographs. And then I did a road trip that was through the Sierras. This was back in March, and we stopped off at lots of little gold mining towns where there were lots of sort of old cabins and buildings there that were all sort of collapsing and falling down. And I took loads of photographs of that stuff. And that kind of solidified where the direction of all this was going, because I think I liked the houses locally because you kind of had these houses at night with no people, so the house kind of symbolizes like a sort of shelter. You know that the people are inside there, and it's sort of this refuge that everybody goes to, and we go into our little compartments and so on. So the houses had that kind of implication with that. But then there's a whole other layer of stuff with looking at these kind of old abandoned houses. It was kind of interesting to think, who'd lived there and how they'd been there for such a short time. There are towns out there in the Sierras that existed for a few decades and with huge, busy, thriving towns of tens of thousands of people for a few decades and then died. And you look at the houses and you kind of, I don't know, you sort of look at them and think of all the things that those houses have symbolized. They've been sort of hope and optimism, and maybe they've been really good times, and then maybe they kind of became everything falling apart for these people or something. And somebody wrote something in the East Bay Express about this show, and she said the houses, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was something about the houses that they weren't sort of romanticized, that they just are themselves, they are what they are, sort of thing. And that's what I was happy about that, because that's kind of what I was going for. I wanted you to be able to just look at them and they're not like sort of twee, cozy houses, but they could take on any of the dimensions of house and home and what that could mean, which can be right, which can be something very happy and cozy, or it can be something very dark too. It depends what mood you're looking at it in.
It's interesting. You mentioned your travels in the West, and your work reminds me of it too. It's very Americana, in a sense of how they look like American artifacts.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that you weren't born here. You're not an American-born citizen. And what's with the Britain and doing a better job at emulating things that come out of America than Americans are, like rock and roll, right? I mean, this stuff really captures this American spirit. It's amazing.
Yeah.
That I don't see in a lot of artists. So.
Well, I guess it's because it's exotic, I mean.
Yeah. It's the colors, and you got like Eugene denim colors.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
Scrappy wood. It's how it goes now. A lot of concrete, as well.
Yeah.
So you really capture that spirit of the American aesthetic. Right?
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, that is kind of what I'm aiming to do, and I mean, all these things that if I'm saying I'm aiming to do something, I never really actually set out to do it. You kind of do something and then realize afterwards that was maybe what you were aiming at. And the first pictures I made when I came here, they were all to do with the landscape, and they were totally abstract, but I kind of realized they were really influenced by just experiencing the Western landscape for the first time, and how different it is from the English landscape, which is all, you fly over Britain and every square inch of it has been used for centuries and is all divided up and somewhat kind of manicured. There's no real wilderness, but you go out in the Sierras and it's as well as the fact that it's totally different. It's not green. It's it's desert, and the actual materials in there are really different. But just the way it's used, that whole thing. I mean, like these ghost towns, the way they're kind of like being reclaimed back to nature. There's nothing like that in Britain. You just don't see it. I mean, there isn't the space to allow that to happen. So.
Sure. It was built over a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by that. It's exotic. Americana is exotic. I mean, like, I don't know. The first show I did here had pictures of. It had like names of like really cheesy names of motels and things like that. Real, real kind.
You did the Woody Guthrie lyrics as well.
Yeah. That's right.
For a series of paintings, Martin, you incorporated the entire song, right? This land is your
Yeah.
Kind of in the background, that was his beginning painting, and then he built up over those layers, so there was just little hints of the story behind. It is definitely.
And I'm sure an American going to England would have an insightful take on English stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Was your work similar before you moved here? The paintings?
There was a lot of figurative stuff, and there was a fair amount of sort of natural imagery, but it was more figurative, and I did a lot of things with sort of watercolor and mixed media on paper. There's some similar things, definitely some similar sort of aesthetic things, but the materials have totally changed. This sort of painting that I do, where I'm sanding a lot, building up layers, that's all something that I kind of have developed since being here, but it does relate to the watercolor in that it's lots of translucent things. Most of the time when I'm putting down a solid color, I'm intending to break it up by sanding it later. So that translucency and also being open to sort of accidents, having a technique that you can't totally control is kind of like watercolor. So there's definitely a direction there for sure.
Yeah, your surfaces. People comment every time they come and see the show. They get up close to it and they almost want to scratch it. I don't know. They're meticulous without being precious. They're beautiful. Yeah, the surfaces are wonderful. They're matte. They're not. There's variances in sheen, and it's obvious that's a part of what it's important to you, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not really very meticulous.
Yeah.
It's kind of like. There's a lot of masking tape and a lot of wet sanding things. I rarely brush things. There are a few little bits will be brushed on, but most things are just masked and then they're built up in layers, and then I wet sand them, and there's only a limited amount of control you've got of that. So you kind of get some nice surprises with that, or not. Sometimes, sometimes things get a bit lost, or sometimes things break up too much and kind of disappear. But again, working small, that was kind of much more manageable than working big. So,
it's not that small too. For a lot of artists, it's on the bigger side.
Right. Yeah. For the techniques I use, it doesn't really translate to much smaller. Very well. Sure. They'd have to be really super simple. Yeah.
You guys have any questions?
So I was questioning the abstract versus the narrative or presentational. So you are often to look at one of these and immediately say, okay, I see a house, I see maybe some trees, I see a flagpole because I've seen flags elsewhere. maybe those sticks are afire, and I'm just wondering your process. You start, or that right behind you, there's a power cable or something.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you're really coming from a photo that you've taken, or seeing these narrative elements and then abstract from there, or do they just appear and all of a sudden you're seeing it yourself?
It's a bit of both. None of them are sort of illustrations of a particular photograph. A lot of them like pull little bits out of multiple photographs, and some of them just sort of take it as a starting point, and they don't really they don't end up really resembling the thing that they started. I usually am starting off with something like with this. I might be starting off with. I think I started this off with this building and this kind of like window, and then actually this is a case study. Okay, so this started off as this building and this little window here, and then I had this kind of like thing that was like a sort of shower of marks coming down here. On this side, it looked terrible. It just didn't work at all. So I had to sand all that out and then do something else with that half of the picture, and tried several different things, sanding them off, and somehow that little building kind of emerged out of that to balance this one out. But then it needed height, and then it started just two angles. So I put the little sort of tray cable, which is in a few of them. Just it's kind of purely the tutorial thing. But then you can. I mean, what I really like about it is you can then start reading into it, because you put a cable and it starts to apply, and it's connected to something, and then that house starts to mean something. Right. So, yeah.
So you're figuring it out as you go?
Yeah. And I tend not to have too many sketches. I have some little sketches just experimenting with compositions and so on, but usually I start off with a lot of lists of things that might be in the painting. So with this, I kind of had a very simple list that it was going to be just the buildings, these sort of patterns of planks, and then I'd done some paintings. There's a big one on the wall through there from a couple of years ago, where they had sort of piles of sticks that looked either like a sort of a collapsed wood pile or a campfire or something like that. So and all these houses I'd seen in the Sierras, a lot of them were falling down and had piles of sticks on the floor, and planks that were sort of rotting into the ground and that sort of thing. So I kind of like the idea of using those, although sometimes they might appear in a picture just because I want something busy and kind of angular. It's just a purely pictorial thing, so it's not there because it means something, but then because you put it there, it kind of does mean something, and then you start to have a whole set of, you start to almost start getting a narrative thing implied. But that's kind of how I work, which is, it's a bit sort of backwards in some ways. I think people commonly think that if you're painting, you've got an idea and you're conveying it with a painting, but it's more like I'm playing around with the images and then seeing what implied meanings pop up as it goes along, and then maybe rolling with that and working with it. I mean, there's the one that's on the wall there, kind of looks like on the other side, as you come in, that's got I'd seen one building out in the Sierras that had an old tire leaning up against a cabin, and this tire must have been leaning there for 40 or 50 years, because it was just the wheel was there, and then all the rubber had gone, and there was just all the threads of the tire, and it looked really cool, and I took some photos of it. But that one, because it's kind of ended up being completely surrounded by junk and collapsed stuff, so it looks almost a bit kind of apocalyptic. So it's kind of like whatever it is, it's coming completely unraveled. But it didn't really start off like that. You know, I didn't really have that intention until I just started filling up the empty space with these abstract things. So, but that's what makes it interesting to do it, because you don't know where it's going. You know, I think if I was completely working to a plan and working with a really set intention, I'd get bored really quickly. It'd be very hard to sustain it.
There's no play in that sense, right? Just
Yeah.
executing something.
Yeah, I like the surprises. Yeah.
So when you're doing public work, how do you manage? Like, is it the same way? Like,
Oh, that's
That's true.
Doing organically, or you have to have a plan, of course, so it has to be cool. But how do you?
that's a really good question.
You tell your clients, like, I'll figure it out as I go.
Right.
You're gonna like it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because it doing public work is almost the exact opposite. You generally have to have a design signed off by everybody, and you have to rationalize that design and stick to it and then execute it. And yeah, it's a completely different way of working for me, and I kind of like both. So I mean, that's definitely much more of a design problem with those things in that way, in that you've got to have an outcome that's fixed.
Do you go through the same kind of like organic creative process before bigger and large scale, and then I guess or you just
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. I might like work something out, either with, you know, lots of little drawings or little paintings, or, you know, things with cut out paper, whatever seems to be most appropriate to the project. And yeah, I'll come up with that sort of final design by sort of experimenting and playing, but then it's definitely a matter of then just scaling it up and executing it. And there's very few creative decisions in that. It's like 95% logistics and, yeah, dealing with whatever process and materials you've got, which is fun. It's a nice contrast. It's because when I've done one of those, I'm just dying to go in the studio and do this. But then, I don't know, if I was doing this all the time, it might seem a bit self-indulgent. Yeah, it might be. It's good to have some proper. It's good to have some proper work.
What kind of public art have you done? What other projects?
Well, I used to do some design work and work for a company, like a commercial company that did work with concrete. So the first public projects I got purely because I knew how to do some processes with concrete. Like I knew about coloring concrete and cutting designs or blasting designs into concrete. So that was kind of like a foot in the door, really, for getting some public art. And a lot of the public art depends on, because it's often tied up with construction projects, they need someone who can do it, and they can rely on you doing it in a way that's going to be durable and last, so you know your processes and your materials, and you can do it on time and on budget. And that's their main concern, and that they're as concerned about that as they are about the content of the art sometimes. So, yeah, more sometimes. So yeah, that was my sort of foot in the door to doing that. And then once I'd got some of those projects, some of the same people came back about other projects. So I've done things that are in concrete that are in sidewalks or sort of concrete areas where I might embed metal into them and either sandblast or cut designs and colour the concrete, things like that. And then I've done some things that are painted murals, some that are murals using other materials, so some using this kind of material, but done on sort of cement boards, so they're sort of permanent outdoor pieces. and then some pieces with wood as well, reclaimed wood. Either, actually, there was the pieces that were in a show here a couple of years ago where they were all these sort of freestanding wooden pieces. Like those they're a temporary public art installation in Napa now. Those ones, but then I've done some flat pieces that are similar using reclaimed wood as wall pieces. And in fact, I did one earlier this year that's going to be the lobby. It's like a mural for the lobby of a building down at MacArthur BART station, where they're putting in new housing there. So it's going to be the sort of one wall of the lobby, but it's a sort of two-story high lobby. So it's a 20-foot square mural, all in reclaimed wood. So it's really cool. I'm kind of excited to get that installed and be able to see it. I did it a few months ago, and it's been in storage ever since, and I'm waiting to get the go-ahead to go and install it as soon as the building is ready. So.
Do you have to do your own installation, or do you have people who can put things like that up?
With that one, I'm doing it with a carpenter friend of mine who's a good Finnish carpenter, because I'm a bit sloppy with wood. So yeah, I often have to get help with those things. But yeah, it's an interesting variety, and because with the public things, they're often outdoors and they need to be durable, kind of pushes you into working with different materials, which is always interesting. And there's, I've done things with sort of laser cut metal and things I knew nothing about, and it's kind of interesting to learn about them and see what you can do with them. So.
How about your installation here?
So, the installation. The installation, which is made up of little wooden houses and little concrete houses, that just span off the paintings, because that was one of the things where actually the fact that I was going to do the show originally with Barbara, the way that came about was partly through thinking about Barbara's work, because she does a lot of work with wood and with lath, and I was just looking at the paintings and thinking these patterns of planks in lots of the paintings looked like they could be a part of Barbara's work, where she works with the lath. So I thought, I'm going to try making some little houses out of this, and I didn't really have a plan as to where they were going. But I made some, and I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. What can I do with this? And I had this idea. I was going to make one of those and set fire to it and film it, and then do paintings of it, like from the film of it burning, which I did. But it just didn't really go with the rest of the paintings, because all the paintings were kind of nice and that clean and clear, and to do something that was sort of burning or had burnt down, it just didn't fit. So I still might come back to that. I think it might actually be a nice kind of print project to try and do. But anyway, while I was making these wooden houses and playing around with this idea, I also thought, well, if I'm going to make wooden houses, I could also, if you're going to make something out of wood, you might as well fill it with concrete and use it as a mold to make a concrete one. So doing that, you kind of then put them together, and you got one very permanent thing and one very fragile, temporary looking thing. And I don't know, that was a kind of a nice dynamic. And then because I kind of forgot, which I should know, because like I said, I did actually have something of a career working with concrete, but I forgot that concrete, when it cures, shrinks, which I know that, but I forgot about that. I put some, because I was running out of concrete, and just to keep the weight down, I'd stuffed some of these buildings with, originally with styrofoam, and then I ran out of styrofoam, so I stuffed some of them with bits of wood. And then as those ones shrank, they all started cracking. But again, it's kind of like, oh, well, they're cracking. So what does that, what does that imply? And so then they're kind of like crumbling, and you start to think of California earthquakes and crumbling infrastructure, and how even concrete buildings aren't actually permanent. So yeah, I don't know. They just seemed a nice thing to experiment with, and there was no particular plan about those. And the form that they take, assembled like that, was really just a way of presenting them in the space. And they're I don't know. They're just a fun complement to the paintings. But it's created something with a kind of an atmosphere to it, and it echoes the paintings and the things that the paintings are about, I think. So.
Destruction, earthquakes, fire.
Yeah. And they've got the lights glowing inside them, so they can be like cozy, warm, comforting homes too, if you want to look at them that way.
They're all broken down, they're all like kind of charred and in disarray.
Exactly. Right, and some of them, like that one and this one, I was playing around with sort of disguising them amongst things that were kind of implying trees and a forest. I was just kind of thinking about sort of cabins up in the Sierras, in the wooded areas, where you might see the kind of light of a cabin, but you've got a glimpse of it through some trees or something. As you maybe you're like driving along the road and you just kind of catch a glimpse of something, but it's all it's hiding in the wood pile. No, I mean that's the thing. I mean they could mean lots of things. I mean, for example, the flag. I mean, several of them ended up with flags, and the flag was one of those pictorial things. It was like, okay, so just to balance the composition here, I need something up in this high space up here. What can it be? And maybe it needed something vertical as well. So it was like, I'm going to stick a flagpole in there. But then you start thinking, well, a flag. Why do people put flags up? Is it, it could be to celebrate something, or to, announce their patriotism or whatever. Or it could be a kind of, fuck off, this is my land kind of thing. Or it could be with the white flag there, it could be somebody surrendering to life, So you can just interpret it in lots of different ways. And I kind of like the ambiguity. I think I've done lots of other projects and little groups of work that have been about something much more tangible and specific. I don't know. I think things work better for me when they're more ambiguous, and they're more just about a picture that people can read lots of different meanings into.
That one's specifically because you chose such nice vertical lines for the coloration of the house.
Yeah.
It comes out as more like this is a camp.
Right.
The flag is,
right.
Even though it's just one small choice, everyone projects very specific things onto those very minor.
Right.
And that flag led to now.
Right, and that was definitely like a choice with the colours, because I realised some of these things, because they're done at night. And if you think about it, and like at night time, all the colours kind of desaturate at night. Everything looks very, subdued in terms of colour. So putting these colours in kind of made them, it stopped them looking quite as doomy as they would have done had I just stuck with something more realistically night. And it kind of makes them a bit otherworldly too. Yeah.
Out of a movie, maybe, versus the broken down pieces that have a darker.
Yeah.
This one looks again more.
Yeah, and some of them that are very flat on like that, they're not in any perspective, or they're not in any kind of scene. They are almost like little stage sets or something, which is kind of like this as well. This kind of looks like a sort of phony movie set town. Something, so which I kind of like, and with those towns in the Sierras, it's hard to tell the difference, Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions on Mr. Webb's work? Anything else, Mr. Martin?
No.
Okay.
I think
Thank you.
I think that covers it.
Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming out. We'll pull some work up we go to Martin's website on the iPad, you can browse through some of his other projects as well. It'll be exciting. And he's got lots of stuff in the art shop as well. There's a really